I'll say that I think this is the first official presentation that's been given on the National Center. So you're the test batch to make sure we say all the right things and deliver all the right information. So we're really excited that you came to spend a little bit of time with us because this has been something that has been in the works for quite some time. So we're excited about it. Make sure there's just a few more people coming down, so we'll give it a second or so here. So how many were here over the weekend so you at least got to see the blue skies and the beautiful leaves? Yeah, a few of you anyway? Yeah, sorry about this weather. I wish there was something we could do to control it. All right. I think we're just about good to go. All right. So thanks for coming to spend a few hours with us today. I think we're supposed to be wrapped up by 7:30 or something like that. I just check it. Be Stephen and I talking to ourselves. That's how that would work. We do quite a bit. I'll be talking to myself. He won't be here either, right? For those I haven't met, my name is Gary Margolis, and my business partner, Stephen Healy. And for 12 years, I had the privilege of being the chief of police at this university. And enjoyed, I can say, just about every minute of it. It was a great experience. And in 2008, Stephen and I, he's the former director of public safety, chief of police at Princeton University, which I'd never heard of prior to meeting him, so it was nice to kind of get acquainted with a little school in New Jersey. Formed our consulting company, Margolis Healy, and it's just been such a privilege to work with so many universities and colleges around the United States and Canada doing the work that we do, which led us to a couple of opportunities, which led us to the National Center, which is something we are extremely excited about. And I'll set up the framework for what happened, and then I'm going to let Stephen talk a little bit about the history, because he's been involved in the National Center discussion from the beginning, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that. So one of the things that we've been honored to be able to do for the Department of Justice is manage several national initiatives. After Virginia Tech, the Department of Justice COPS office gave Margolis Healy an award to establish the national standards in behavioral threat assessment. So if you go to campusthreatassessment.org and you can download for free all kinds of resources that we developed under that grant, we developed the national framework. So for those of you who have behavioral threat teams on your campus, there's about a 95% chance with very little variation that some formation, the basis of what you do, came from the work that we did in establishing the national standards as such. And we have at least one person in the room, Jeff Nolan from Dindsey, who was with us as one of our initial subject matter experts in doing that. We then went on to manage another grant for the Department of Justice in crime prevention. We discovered that university and college students weren't necessarily coming to pizza parties to learn how to not have their bike stolen. They got really good at getting in the room, getting the pizza, and getting out of the room before being seen by whoever was teaching the product, the course. So we needed to understand how universities were developing their crime prevention strategies. So we were awarded a grant to develop the national best practices in campus crime prevention. And that grant is underway now, and we should be releasing findings and programs for you all to replicate on your campuses based on what we found in the field in the next 6 to 8 months. The one after that, another one we're managing is on travel abroad safety. So if you send students around the world, our question was, how exactly are we helping them be safe? And in trying to understand that, we approached, again, the Department of Justice and said, I think we can develop national standards for how this works. And they awarded us another grant, and we are in the process of doing that now, of looking at travel abroad safety planning. We'll be holding, in the coming months, we're scheduling, after the first of the year, a national domestic forum, in addition to our research that's happening through the professors that work with to do that. And then at some point in the spring, we'll actually be holding a forum overseas, because what we heard and we realized was that many of you send students around the world, and we have to go where your students and faculty are to also understand firsthand how it is that they're experiencing safety in those spaces. So that's currently underway. So all of that led to what happened with the National Center. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephen right now to chat a little bit about the history of the center and how it is that we came to get what we got.
Yeah, I got that. Whoever that was. Smarty pants. I actually do this. No. I hope I can see everyone, or everyone can see me. It's just better because I think there's only one lavalier for me just to sit, and it's more of a conversation than anything. So many of you probably started first hearing about the National Center for Campus Public Safety a year or so ago. Specifically, there was a lot of conversation right after the tragedy at Sandy Hook. I think there continued to be a lot of interest that was really ramped up. Although Sandy Hook wasn't a higher ed incident, I think it resonated with many of us who have been kind of beating the drum for many years about the National Center. So let me just give you a little background on the National Center. Back in 2004, the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, the COPS office, Gary mentioned it, it's the COPS office. They are the office in the Department of Justice that funds grants to municipalities, states, cities, counties, and colleges and universities, mostly for resources for law enforcement. And so many of you all may have a COPS grant. That's what they're commonly known as. And it may fund 3 or 4 positions for police officers or security officers, or it may even fund technology. So that's the COPS office. So back in 2004, the COPS office, the director of the COPS office really kind of identified and acknowledged that there was a void for providing services and resources in the campus safety and security realm. There really weren't a lot of government agencies that were funding projects or staffing or really pretty much anything related to safety and security. There was some, the Office of Violence Against Women were funding some VIRA grants. There were kind of some one-off things. Maybe you were getting some things from COPS office, but there wasn't really a sustained effort for colleges and universities. And so the COPS office, in conjunction with Johns Hopkins Center for Police Leadership, held a national forum on campus public safety. And that was a 2 or 3 day gathering where a number of us who were either kind of involved in international associations or the national associations, or at institutions that allowed us to do a lot of work in this area nationally, brought us all together to Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, and Gary participated in that as well. And one of the primary recommendations out of that summit was the need for a center or some type of clearinghouse or think tank that brought together professionals in the field, subject matter experts, anyone who had a stake in the conversation around campus safety and security. Representatives from NASPA and ACPA and NACUA and all of the alphabet soup associations, bringing them together to work collectively and collaboratively on the issues related to campus safety and security. And so not just about law enforcement, not just about security, although that's important, not just about high-risk drinking, although that's important, not just about suicide prevention, although that's important, not just about violence against women, gender violence. All those are important, but it wasn't. We knew we needed something that was going to kind of deal with all of those issues. And so the summit report recommended a National Center for Campus Public Safety, and the report was issued in 2005. And like a lot of summit reports, of which you've probably been a part of, that's what it does. You go to the conference, you have a nice time for 2 or 3 days, you produce a beautiful report, and it sits on the shelf somewhere, right? And that's what happened with the National Center report, the National Summit report. And then happened Virginia Tech, right? And so the tragedy at Virginia Tech, April 16, 2007 happened, and there started to be this conversation again. Right? We need resources, because not people necessarily inside higher ed, although people inside higher ed as well, but folks outside of higher ed really wanted to know what are colleges and universities doing to keep our kids safe, right? What are they doing? And nobody really knows what are the standards. You go to one campus on one side of the street, and they have a sworn law enforcement agency, and you go to one across the street, and they have non-sworn contract security. So what are the standards? What are the best practices? So there started to be, again, significant conversations around establishing this national center. I was, at the time, the president of the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators and had the opportunity to testify before the Senate a week after the tragedy at Virginia Tech, and then 2 or 3 weeks later before the House Committee on Education and Labor. And I raised this issue again. The need that we had this recommendation has been sitting around for 3 or 4 years. We hadn't done anything about it. Now everybody's up in arms because we've had this tragedy at Virginia Tech. What are we going to do? And what we kept pushing was, we have an idea. We believe we have at least the beginnings of a think tank, a national center, a clearinghouse that can help colleges and universities, a free resource, and it can help colleges and universities across the country enhance their strategies and their initiatives around safety and security. Again, it was designed, or at least the original thought was that it would be a collaborative space and a collaborative center that would be a resource to everyone, all the key stakeholders across the institution. And so it started to get a lot of steam. There were a couple of bills that were passed. There was a bill that was passed in the House. Representative Congressman Bobby Scott out of Virginia, big supporter from the beginning, kept pushing it. Unfortunately, if you can imagine this, the House and the Senate couldn't actually get their stuff together, and so the bills just died. And then again, there was Sandy Hook, and there was this renewed interest that we needed to do something about ensuring that colleges and universities, and to some extent K-12 school systems, have access to the information that they need relative to the best practices, the promising practices, the things that just make sense to keep our students safe. And so the bill was finally, well, actually, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General Holder, made a commitment that they were going to divert some funding that was already in the Department of Justice to stand up the center on a short-term basis. His leadership in that particular area gained some steam, and the bill was finally passed this past
January, February?
March. Was it March? I think it got passed right around the same time that the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act was passed. And so the center was officially established for 2 years. Initially, there's some other appropriation bills that are kind of winding their way through our closed government, so they're not really winding their way. They'll probably stop someplace. But there's some belief that the center will be funded for an additional 3 years after the initial 2 years. Well, at least we are hoping. So what happened was that the center was funded. It was basically given to the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is one of the alphabet organizations in the Department of Justice. And they put out a grant solicitation for entities to run the National Center. And fortunately, very humbling and very exciting, but also a little scary, we got notified, I guess about a month and a half ago, that we had won the bid to run the National Center. And so Gary's going to talk a little bit more about what we envision, and we'll kind of, for those of you who have seen Gary and I present, we just kind of play off each other. Any questions about the history of the National Center? Folks kind of familiar about where all this stuff came? Because a lot of people say, wow, this National Center thing just came up in 2013. It's been, as a lot of things in the government, about 11 years in its making. And so we're very excited. And let me turn it over to Gary to talk more about how we envision it evolving over the next several years.
So it was, thanks, Stephen. So certainly humbling in every shape and form, and our passion about campus safety and the awesome responsibility we've been given to get it right for you, because that's what this is about, getting it right for you all, because this center exists for a resource to you. A couple of things I want to say as we start this. The government, as you know, is closed, which means the good news is, it's still closed. Yeah, the good news is that we were told the funding for the National Center was passed and appropriated, and we're good to go. The downside was that all of the special people who actually make the mechanics of the funding work and the back end to transfer the monies and all that kind of stuff, they are not working right now. So we have the National Center, but we're not allowed, we can't spend anything yet because we just can't get access to the funds.
And by the way, you also can't enter your Clery data if you haven't already done that. You can't enter your Clery data into the website either.
Because it's down too.
So, and then you'll get audited
for failure to enter your Clery data. Why I mention this is because This beautiful logo is still not official yet. So this is an unofficial, and it could change because all of this has to get approved by the government, but they're closed. So I think Stephen and I wanted to put something on the screen so you could have a graphic to identify with. But this is the tentative logo for the National Center for Campus Public Safety. As Stephen mentioned, BJA is our oversight. They are very engaged in the National Center's success. Our grant manager, we've worked with him for several grants now. His name is David Adams. He's wonderful to work with. We had Stephen and I had a call with the director of BJA not too long ago. She is extremely excited about this as well. So there's a lot of emphasis being placed by the Office of Justice Programs, OJP, within the Department of Justice that has BJA as a part of it in getting this right. And it's been very exciting to be working with them. So I thought what we would do is we would start with what are the primary responsibilities for the National Center. This is the information that was outlined by the Department of Justice and inspired by the United States Congress as to what the center will do. And in general, it's going to identify and prioritize the needs of the field. And I want to be clear that for Stephen and I to express that the needs of the field means all aspects of campus public safety within campus public safety. So it could mean law enforcement, security, emergency management. There are student affairs components to this, residence hall safety, travel abroad. All the pieces and parts that you would define campus safety as, one of the functions of the National Center is to identify and prioritize those. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go through this, how that happens. For those who have tried to navigate websites that have services for education, higher ed in particular, in the government, you'll know that it's almost impossible to do. There are so many places to go. You get some things in the Department of Ed website, some things in the Justice Department's website. One of the goals of the National Center is to aggregate all that information. It's a one-stop shop for you. You're not having to go and look for the information you need across departments and places you wouldn't even know where to look. So it's an aggregation tool. It's designed to connect the major campus public safety entities with each other and with their national partners. So that was important because Stephen and I, for example, when Stephen was the president of IACLEA, the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, I was the chair of the University and College Police section of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, two major organizations that were connected by the people that were in both of them, but not necessarily united by a common entity or something that brought them together. And we've seen this happen with NACUBO a couple years ago, did a phenomenal job on a project with campus emergency management, right? And all, again, great resource, but unless you know that NACUBO did it, you wouldn't know to go look to NACUBO to get the information, right? So the National Center's job is to aggregate and connect that information, all right? Highlight and promote best and innovative practices. So this is the idea that what is happening in the field that can be identified and shared, and what is happening in the field or that isn't happening that should be happening, and how do we go about creating that? So that was the fifth of the major bullets, and the sixth one is.
Let me just speak to that one a little bit. That's you know, we always like to be a little cautious when we say best practices, right? Because you don't know what a best practice is, and sometimes best isn't. You don't need best. Sometimes you just need good enough, right? So we're very careful about that. But what we do know through our relationship with folks at NACUA and people like Jeff Nolan and all the wonderful attorneys that we have the pleasure of working with, there are standards, right? And some of those standards are standards because some national organization has set us a standard. Some things are standard because they have evolved through practice and it now is the reasonable standard of care, right? So what we want to try to do is identify. One of those examples is threat assessment, you know, behavioral threat assessment or whatever you might call it, behavioral intervention, whatever you call it at your institution. And on our consulting side, when we work with institutions, we always ask, so what are you doing for behavioral threat assessment? And there's very rare now, right, 4 or 5 years later, almost 6 years later, out of Virginia Tech, that you don't find an institution, that you would find an institution that's not doing something, right? I mean, what's the show of hand? How many of you all have some type of threat assessment? Now, I just said everybody, of course everybody's going to raise their hand because you don't want to be the outlier, right? But that's kind of the standard. That's the standard practice in higher ed, right? And so when we go to institutions and we ask and we say, hey, what are you doing in this area? And they say, well, we haven't really, you know, we're not really doing anything in this area. That's when, you know, well, you might want to look at the best practices or the promising practices. So this is not, we don't intend for the National Center to be a body that will tell you what the standards are, right? But what we will do is avail you to all of the evolving practices, the evolving standards of care, the revolving best ideas about how to address specific issues.
We're seeing that with campus public safety in particular. You can get accreditation through IACLE, you can get accreditation through CALEA, the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. As-is has standards in campus security now.
You can get it through your state.
You can get it through your state. So the center is going to be an opportunity to aggregate that information. And then essential training and technical assistance to be delivered. The National Center is not a consulting entity. You're not going to be able to come to it and say, you know, come to my campus and do X, Y, and Z. That's not the way it was designed. What you will be able to do is say, okay, you know what? We need, we need information on Clery training. We need to understand Clery better. The National Center would deliver that at either no cost or at a low cost for institutions. And then we'll talk a little bit about the kind of how we see this National Center funding outside of federal dollars coming down the pike. But these are the basics of what the National Center has to do. Any questions about these before we move into how we're going to accomplish that? Any thoughts? BF, those blinding flashes of the obvious? Oh.
So you're associated with the Department of Justice, but when you put out standards, it's not going to be like a government-issued standard. I'm a little confused about the relationship with the government and who's actually putting out the standards.
Sure. So when you say standard, the National Center is not going to be decreeing what campuses should and shouldn't be doing. It's really a resource. It's a place to come to get information. So I cannot envision a time when the National Center would be saying every university and college must do X, Y, and Z, and here's the standard to do it. That's not what it was designed for. It is an entity, it is a creation of Congress, managed or delegated to the Department of Justice, managed by Margolis Healy, if that makes any sense. It's the entity that controls the National Center is ultimately the Bureau of Justice Assistance, because their oversight of the grant, they are the bosses. But the management, the day-to-day running, the delivery of the services are where Stephen and our company makes that happen.
So let me try to answer that a different way or another way. If we hold a national forum on, what are the pressing issues in safety and security, and out of that national forum, or regional forum, we then produce a white paper that says, okay, during the forum, we met, we brought folks from here, we developed, we talked about what the most pressing issues are, we identified these top 5. And here are some ways that we brainstormed and that we later researched and analyze ways to deal with these top 5. They won't become, it will be under the National Center logo, the BJA logo will be on it, and so it will be an official government document because it's funded by you, thank you for your tax dollar, but it won't be a standard. And we will make sure that every document, every publication that comes out of National Center has the appropriate disclaimer that this, this is in no way, a standard established by the government. It's just a result of conversations and evolving, evolving thought and analysis on ways to deal with various safety and security issues.
Make you feel any better?
But we do. That's a great point. We do have to navigate that to make sure that it doesn't become that something that's produced by the National Center doesn't wind up in some lawsuit some civil lawsuit. Yeah. Although it will anyway. But we want you to be able to say, well, it says right there that like the Clery Act says, there's no private right to action, right? There's a way we need to think about that.
I suspect that the analogy that's in some of our minds is OCR guidance, which is generally taken when we're getting dear colleague letters on things like Title IX that is always passed as guidance, that it's guidance that you ignore at your peril. I don't want to get mired in this issue necessarily, but just having a sense of the status of what the expectation is going to be with regard to institutional decisions around implementation of the various
the way I like to, two things. Number one, please don't look at anything that comes out of the National Center like you look at the Dear Colleague letter, all right? Or any Dear Colleague letter.
Ours will be a lot clearer and cleaner and everything else.
Hey, watch yourself. There are folks here. Oh, no, they can't travel, so they're not here. We can talk bad about the government. No.
I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, hopefully folks won't take what we produce that way or what we publish that way. How many of you all remember the Higher Ed Center for Alcohol, Other Drugs, and Violence Prevention, right? Great resource. Funded by the government, right? Department of Education funded. It was a national center. They produced a lot of like really hard-hitting, useful research that probably most of you all, if you're doing anything substances around alcohol and other drugs on your campus, you're probably using the prevention framework developed and produced by Linda Langford, one of the folks at the National Center. So at the Higher Ed Center. Think of it more like that center as opposed to other entities that the government may stand up.
So you're going to do great work and then all the funding is going to get cut and we'll be able to access that.
That's right.
No,
yeah, exactly.
We had to
Exactly.
actually prove how it's going to keep going, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
We had to do that. We had to build that into the grant.
Yeah,
so
I'll show you what that is.
hopefully it won't just go away like all the, actually all the Higher Ed Center stuff is someplace now. It's at a website.
It'll soon be on the National Center
We'll
for
get
Public
it.
Safety's
Yeah.
website.
Yeah.
So who sets your agenda? You set the agenda as the experts or through the grant administration? Because it is different than the Higher Ed Center because it was a contract.
That was a contract.
Right,
This
so,
is a grant. So who sets the
right,
agenda?
so the agenda gets set, we'll get a little bit more into this, so I'll just give you a quick, the agenda is set by an advisory board and by the BJA. And we'll share that in a second, it's a few slides in as to where it's going.
In terms of staffing, how is the National Center going to achieve its mission? There are going to be key positions. So we're hiring a director that'll run the National Center. That search actually it kicks off tomorrow morning when I finalize things with Spellman and Johnson. Ellen Heffernan and her team agreed to run the national search at no cost to the National Center. So I want to give them a plug because they stepped forward to help with that. So yeah, it's good stuff for Ellen and her team. And they are running this national search to help us find the best possible person out there to help us get this to where it needs to be. So the director should be on board at some point in the next 3 months, like after the first of the year is where it's likely to happen. They will then help us hire a technical and training assistance coordinator / deputy director who will have responsibility for the T&A pieces and making sure all that's working, right? And then 2 research associates, maybe a third, but for now 2. The National Center was funded by Congress for higher education, and yet there are components to it that serve K-12. So there's been some discussion about adding a research associate that can focus on K-12 issues, because there's a lot of schools out there saying, how can you help a lot of K-12? How can we benefit? How can you help us? And the Bureau of Justice Assistance is not deaf to that call and to that issue. So there'll be research associates, and we'll talk a little bit more in a second what they're going to do. And then Stephen and I pitched to BJA the creation of a national fellowship program where every semester we would bring fellows to the National Center who would work on specific issues. And those fellows could come from any discipline or demographic within education that has a higher ed, that has a safety or security component to it. So we could see folks from student affairs, we could see folks from public safety, we could see folks from emergency management, Clery and Title IX, and all those pieces and parts coming to the National Center for periods of time to work on specific projects and particular needs. We're pretty excited about that. We probably will have the fellowship program up and running by the 3rd quarter of next year is where I think it would likely be, but it's going to depend on how quickly we get staff up and running.
And we'll be, if you're involved in your professional associations, we'll be relying a lot on your professional associate NASPA and ACPAs and emergency management and NACUA to work with your member organizations to nominate folks to come in, and we'll probably do it on a semester basis. So you'll have a campus public safety and a student affairs professional will be the fellows, and maybe they work on a project together, maybe they work on a different project, but we really like that collaborative. So they come in for a semester, and then we'll bring new fellows in for the next semester. I think a semester is about as long as you want to do without one of your probably key staff members.
So the other piece to think about, or for us to talk about, is that we would not have been successful in being awarded the National Center if it weren't for the University of Vermont. And I have to make sure that we give appropriate credit and explain the role that UVM plays. It's a critical role. And I, in fact, believe with all my heart that the success of the application was because Stephen and I showed how a private-public partnership could work to deliver the services of the National Center. So we get asked, well, what is UVM doing? Well, the Division of Continuing and Distance Education, the group that puts on this wonderful conference every year, is going to be providing certain key infrastructure services to the National Center, supporting our webinars and our seminars, our national meetings and forums, being available to help with academic offerings, which we're going to talk about, and driving that through the university as well. And the National Center compensates the university a significant chunk of resources to be able to make this happen. And then within the College of Education and Social Services, BJA was very clear, and Congress was very clear, that they wanted metrics to know how successful we are. It had to be measured. You got to know. They wanted to know, how are we going to know that you're doing what you need to be doing and that the money that Congress has given the National Center is going to be spent well? So to that end, we've contracted with the College of Education and Social Services for a research faculty member whose job it is to embed at the National Center. And her name is Dr. Jennifer Jewis. She's a research associate professor here at the university who specializes in assessment and metrics and measuring. She will be embedded at the National Center and will be providing all of the data points and analyzing all the data points that measure the success of what we're doing. So that every year we can go back to Congress and say, this is what you got for the bang for your buck. This is how many people we train. And if you've had a chance to look at the solicitation for the National Center, there's 4 pages of metrics that need to be measured. So there's a lot that has to be counted. And we've put in place the infrastructure to do that. So without UVM, the National Center won't be able to function the way that we see it functioning at the value, the cost value that it will function as. Thoughts, questions? Yeah. All right. And there's only 3 or 4 more slides, and then we can open up the conversation. We're just kind of giving you the overview right now. The programmatic focus for the National Center, basically 5. A national directory, a one-stop shop for you all to go to find out who are all the police chiefs, public safety directors, security directors, emergency managers, Clery Act people, all of that national repository of information where you can go and get it in one-stop shop. A national directory was key on that list. A document repository. The number of times that you may have said, well, we're about to sign a new contract for a security guard company, and there's sample RFPs out there. Are there places to go to get information as to what the latest thinking is on sample policies for threat assessment, or whatever that general repository of information, the National Center is designed to be the housing entity for that, to be the place to come for that. And to do that, technology was critically important to the government, and BJA wanted to make sure that we developed a very robust web presence. So to that extent, we're building the one-stop online destination for all things campus public safety related. And that website is being built now. Well, it's being designed now. It won't build until the government opens again because I had to put all the contractors on standby. But it'll start kicking off, and by the first quarter of next year, we'll have had that location. And Stephen and I are collapsing all the other grant websites that we manage, threat assessment, travel abroad safety, crime prevention, into the National Center's website. And it will constantly be evolving. As we add more information into it, it'll grow. There's been some discussions about, do we make portions of the website applicable to different demographics in higher education? Is there a place where student affairs folks can go, a place for risk managers, a place for public safety directors? We don't know yet. It's part of seeing how the system evolves and getting the advisory board up to speed and collecting information from the field to understand what it can do. The government was also very clear in wanting issues and information around threat assessment and mental health challenges to be located in one place. And to that extent, the National Center will be that place for behavioral threat assessment, mental health issues on campuses. This is not, there's a lot that's been done on this already. It's a matter of, again, aggregating it into one place to support. And then the technical assistance piece, which is, I think, fairly straightforward around making sure that it's somewhere you come for information you need and questions you'd like to get answered on areas and issues relating to your.
And under the very broad category of technical assistance, that's where you may see some of the original research, where we may have a research effort or research initiative that addresses off-campus crime. Right, a lot of urban campuses deal with that issue. So what are the does research tell us? What are the evidence-based practices around off-campus crime prevention. So that's where, under that rubric, you'll see some of their original research.
There's another list here, continuing on, daily information dissemination. So again, signing up for the daily email blast, signing up for the daily web announcements of all the things happening in public safety, campus safety related issues around the country. So IACLEA does a little bit of that now. The University and College Police Section does a little bit of that now. If you subscribe to the IAEM, the Emergency Managers Listserv, they do a great job, a little bit of that stuff. Our job is not to compete with any of them, but to aggregate, support them in getting information out to you all on a daily basis as to what's happening. And that's one of the reasons why we have research associates. That's part of their job, is to focus daily on that. We're likely to do an annual forum. I mean, I don't think it's got to be public because it's in our application. It was granted to us that this conference, the University of Vermont is giving this conference the National Center. So in future years, the Legal Issues Conference is morphing. It won't be what it is today. In future years, it'll be the National Centers Conference, and the curriculum and all that you're experiencing will have the same demographic of folks, but it'll be focused much more on campus public safety. So given the look on some of your faces, that's obviously news to you, but that's one of the other things that's happening is that the Legal Issues Conference is transitioning into the National Center. That's part of the connection with the university to make this happen. Assistance with the Bureau of Justice Statistics annual survey. They do an annual survey on campus safety. We're going to help them with that.
They do an annual survey every 5 years.
Every 5 years, right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so maybe we'll make it actually annual. One of the things that Stephen and I have done, and some of you have seen it, is every year our firm does a safety survey that we publish in the Chronicle, publish and everything else. Likely that will flow into the National Center and be the National Center's annual survey to make that happen. In terms of the research, something I want to point out that I think was important to the success of our application, we didn't account for all the possible dollars in the federal grant. We knew that the grant was worth X number of millions at the 2.3 million. And when we wrote our application, we said, it's going to cost this much to do X, Y, and Z, we think, and it's going to cost this much to deliver these services. But we left unallocated a chunk of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what we said to the Justice Department was, we think the advisory board and BJA should be able to identify needs in the field and have us manage the subgrants for those needs. So if there's a particular topic, if it's, hazing is a particular topic that needs more work in higher ed, it's entirely possible that the National Center would issue a subgrant to an entity in the field, another consulting firm, another university, whomever, of a chunk of whatever the dollar amount is, to do research and to develop whatever is needed for that particular area. And we did that because we didn't feel like the needs of campus public safety were completely understood. We have a pretty good handle on what the hot topics are, but there are things that you might identify that no one was thinking of, that needed to be funded. So there's plenty of opportunity. So for those of you who might be interested in research, in doing research in campus public safety, there is money that can be allocated to do that. Right? The mechanisms for that are being worked out now, but the money's there for us to be able to do it. The other thing the Justice Department wanted us to focus on, wanted the Center to focus on, was supporting HBCU and tribal institutions. They identified those as having needs that were not being met by the field, and that we should look at how the National Center can support HBCUs and tribal. And that is, again, we envision a lot of input from the field, from those entities to figure out what we can do for them, but the National Center has a focus programmatically on that. And then again, the training and education piece. Questions? Thoughts? Yes.
Because it ties into the questions that were asked earlier when people were kind of trying to get at will we be mandates coming out of the center. I worry that a lot of people who probably need to access this information might not know about it. Those of us who attend these kind of conferences obviously, thank you, are interested in the topic. And so we make sure we're informed, we seek out resources. But I think, for instance, I work for a nursing school and they definitely need some guidance. But generally, they have no idea they need guidance. And so I'm wondering, how will you make this, even though you guys clearly don't want people to see this as kind of in, a government agency that's giving you a mandate, how will you make sure your presence is widely known?
A couple of ways that we will do that is ensuring that the National Center is prominent at conferences around the country. So the Nursing Association's professional conference, I don't know what the name, but you know, kind of going to all the conferences, going to the NASPAs, the ACPAs, the HBCUs, ACE National Meeting, all of the other associations, ensuring that we're there. Ensuring that the National Center has access to all of the institutions working. Again, I guess we'll work with the iPEDS people at the Department of Education to ensure that we have, and making sure that if they want to join the listserv or whatever that looks like, that institutions have an opportunity to do that. So both by being present at the conferences and by doing proactive reaching out to the various institutions and professional associations. And other ideas, we're open to those as well.
All right, and definitely getting a little bit ahead of myself, but if the grant ends, for instance, and there was a chance for renewal, and let's say another company took over, and then I guess I would wonder about the continuity in keeping the same policies or making sure whatever your agenda was continued. And again, I know that's something you want to think about right now, but
yeah, I don't want to think about that. I don't know, but we obviously have to, and I think a lot of that will rest with BJA would be then responsible for ensuring that work that was initiated under our watch is continued if they decide that it will. Actually, it's under Congress's responsibility since it's only now funded for 2 years. But you know, we'll have those contingency plans in place and be thinking about how to continue the work.
We have the obligation to deliver what BJA wants done. So while we may have some discretion in how we go about doing it, what we go about doing is very prescripted. I mean, it's BJA, this is, whether it's us or someone else, it's BJA's direction under Congress's orders, you know, as to making that happen. So I feel pretty good about that.
thanks.
To follow up on that point, the fact that you delivered the grant to make this happen is actually technically separate from the fact that you were also the successful bidder to be the contractor to carry it out, right?
I don't think so.
Oh.
No, but maybe I didn't understand it.
I don't know. No, I was just saying, when you were asking about continuity, you know, you said that you had to bid to be the contractor to carry this out.
There were 19, I think, what I understand, 19 groups that bid on it.
Exactly. So that function of yours now is technically separate from, you know, the work that you did earlier to develop.
Margolis and Healy is separate. Your work will continue even if you don't have this because you are Steve.
Yeah, our company is, yeah, exactly. Margolis Healy as a private for-profit entity will continue doing what it does independent of the National Center if it should at some point transition away. Advisory board, 6 entities will serve on the advisory board at the initial. IACLEA, the IACP, the IAEM, the Cleary Center for Security on Campus, and the Virginia Tech Victims Family Fund. And then a host of federal agencies that'll want representation. BJA, COPS, FBI, DHS, Department of Education, government to decide who wants to be on this. But the advisory board will provide direction for the National Center, not provide oversight, because BJA controls the National Center, but provide direction on priorities, on projects, on the things that they want to set broad. You know, we need to focus on this, we need to focus on that. It'll be up to the advisory board to give us feedback to do that. That was important for Stephen and I think for the Justice Department, because we wanted the field to implement and control some of the direction of the National Center and not have it be any one entity trying to figure that out in and of itself.
I mean, it's obvious there are a lot of groups that we would love to see up there, but you can only have a finite, and those, I believe these groups were specific, well, they were specifically mentioned in the legislation, not necessarily by name, but the kind of their demographic. And that doesn't mean, the fact that you don't see a lot of groups up there doesn't mean that the center won't work with them. They will continue to collaborate with them. It's just that there's only so many folks you can have on an advisory board and actually reach consensus and get anything done. So it'll be
And there may be certain projects that initiate that have their own separate, smaller groups, and we'll see how that plays itself out. The last 2 more slides, and then we'll stop and we can have an open conversation, because I think we've inundated with all the information. Somebody mentioned, how is the National Center going to survive if funding for Congress goes away? And what we pitched to the Justice Department were at least these 3, but if not others that have come up since. First is offering certificates of advanced education studies in partnership with the University of Vermont. So the ability for you to get a certificate of advanced educational studies in, pick a topic, behavioral threat assessment, Clery, hazing prevention, Title IX, where we bring in the best and brightest in the field to work with us to develop the curriculum, to deliver virtual online programming. Maybe it's a 5-week course and then you come here to the conference, or there's all kinds of permutations for this, where you would get a certificate from the National Center that is backed by the University of Vermont. And there are a host of those potential opportunities that could be done there. The second is this annual conference as an opportunity for it to be able to generate funds to make the National Center sustainable if it happens that Congress doesn't fund it again. And then subscriptions, monographs, dues, and sponsorship. I think it's important. I'm going to put this out there because it's come up before and there's just confusion on it. I think it's important to recognize the National Center is being run as a separate entity within Margolis Healy, which means it's not a profit center for the company. It's being run separate set of books, separate structure, separate, except for the admin, it's its own entity. And why that's important is because it has to stand on its own. We have to generate the revenue to run the center, if needed, through some of these activities as well as the grant dollars. And if those things don't work, then the National Center evaporates. So I think part of the draw for BJA and trusting us with this responsibility is that we have a track record of being successful in managing federal grants for them and in being a successful entity. So these things and all of the potential revenue that generates off them go back into the National Center. That's where they live. And the goal is that if Congress decides not to fund it, BJ wanted to know, how are we going to keep it going? Because it can't go away in 2 years. There's 3 million more pending Congress right now for extended product, extended services. And we don't know if that's going to go through. They can't seem to agree on more important things. I don't know, what that looks like as this kind of makes its way through. But that's the background on what that looks like. And any ideas you have about how to generate the kind of support needed for the National Center, we're wide open to hearing it, as will the new National Director be. So what are the next steps for us? And this is the timeline of kind of what's going on. Because we get asked this a lot too. What's going on? When's it happening? Isn't that nice? Yeah. So launch a national, did I spell it wrong? Launch National Director Search. That's this month. I mentioned that already with Ellen Heffernan and her team. Our office spaces are being acquired now. We're in negotiation now with the landlord to rent commercial space to house the National Center. For those of you who work at universities, which is all of you, you'll know that universities don't have a lot of space. So we had no space at UVM to put it. They just had no available square footage that we could house the National Center on campus. The graphic identity is underway now. You kind of saw a little bit of that. Our web presence is being built. The staff, the rest of the staff, first, second quarter of next year, we're doing a lot of presentations. We have a lot scheduled. And we'll be standing up the advisory board in the coming months to get that group oriented so that when we can launch the first meeting, we already know who's who and who's going to serve on it and so on and so forth. So that's it. At least on the presentation part. Questions, thoughts? Concerns, ideas?
First of all,
I just would like to acknowledge for-profit entity, this is a opportunity, so thank you for stepping up and making this happen. I know the advisory board's group was defined in part by the BGA. So because I know lots of folks in the room, talk to us about, because I know you well enough to know you already have an answer. Talk to us about the student affairs piece finding its way through an advisory board that on paper appears to not acknowledge that side of the house.
Yeah, I think we will revisit that. Obviously, those are some of the groups that we know absolutely have to be on it. That doesn't mean others can't be.
Our original proposal had the advisory board at about 25. We had 25 people on the board, and we had everything, ACPA, NACUA, NASPO. We listed every one that we could think of. And when we sat down with, you know, our advisors and such on this, it was overwhelming. So we figured, okay, what can we start with and expand from? And you're right, Stephen's absolutely accurate with this. You know, next month, there may be a decision that, you know, in consultation with BJA, because they're closed, we can't have the conversation with them, who else we add to this? And some of these groups had offered to us, they said, well, can we represent multiple demographics? And we didn't necessarily jump on that because we didn't know if, for example, NASPO felt like its needs would be served rolling up through the Virginia Tech victims family. I'm making things, you know, so we haven't figured that out yet, but we're open to it.
Yeah, I can pretty much tell you with about 90% surety that there will probably be NASPO or ACPA, and I don't know if that's rolling because they're not the same association. They represent, you know, different people belong to different organizations. I don't know, one year we be at ACPA, next year NASPO.
We talked about student government board, the Association of Student Governance being a part of this, and
the governing boards of institutions, whether they should be. I mean,
we don't have a president on this board.
Just think about it. If you keep extending it.
I just think when we think about campus safety, and you've always been so great as a team,
absolutely,
acknowledging who are we trying to keep safe? Well, our employees and us, but at the end of the day, it's the students, and so their voice, and I respect that the victims family group will have some level of representation of that, but it's a very specific representation.
Right.
So
I got that.
the answer is unpaid internships.
There will be student affairs representative, some shape, form, fashion.
Is the board that, I see multiple federal agencies represented, is there some intentionality to not have a federal agency dominate the advisory board?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're waiting for the Justice Department to tell us politically what needs to happen for them in terms of advisors. So the concern that you're thinking crossed our minds too. We were thinking, my gosh, they could put 15 representatives from every alphabet soup, and then it kind of, now it's a federal advisory board. We don't know how to tackle that one yet, and we're just going to wait and see what happens. We know that there's probably 2 or 3 federal agencies that have to be represented writ large. We'll see how the Justice Department wants to handle the politics of that.
All right, so that's DHS, Ed, and Justice. What that looks like at the end of the day, there's actually, you know, there's a consortium group in DC led by the Office of Law Enforcement Coordination and the FBI that convenes all of the alphabet soup agencies that have some campus stake. Maybe that's where the person comes out.
One person.
You know, but definitely Ed, obviously, right, Title IV. They might want to have something to say about the National Center since they do give us the money to help run our institutions. Definitely DHS, and that's probably, that's an immediate presence, and some shape, form, or fashion of justice.
And just to be clear, this isn't a Margolis, Healy, Stephen, and Gary decision. This is a Justice Department decision. We really, I can't emphasize that enough. We are the instruments of the Department of Justice in making this happen, so that we don't make major decisions that they haven't given us direction on, because that's not how it works.
I like to think of us as instruments of Congress. Actually, the president.
Yeah. Okay, good. Controlled by the Department of Justice. So, you know, it's not what happens. Other thoughts, questions?
I was going to suggest, once you get your mandatory group in place, sometimes if you just focus on people instead of some people, by personal identification, represent many constituencies by virtue of their identity. You might be able to cover several ball games with 1 or 2 folks. I encourage you to keep that as small as you can. Otherwise, you spend all your time preparing these people for whatever.
And so maybe I'll have a conversation with you talking about what that looks like. Because I think I'm going to chair that advisory board, so I'm very interested in being able to herd the cats, you know?
Absolutely.
Planning to be in DC, like when you said you're looking for architects, so it's going to be in Vermont.
Vermont. It's actually 2 miles that way is where they will be. But there will be an office presence in DC. So there'll be the opportunity to hold meetings in DC when needed. We've identified office space there.
at a reduced fee, at a good price, and then the main offices will be here.
So what you said that this conference would be more, because there are a lot of legal issues that don't fall under campus safety. So what does that mean for this conference? Like, is it going to be completely campus safety driven?
Good question. I know that this conference is being transitioned into the National Center. So it will have a focus for campus public safety related issues. What happens to all the other pieces and parts, I don't have an answer to. We don't know that either. I don't know if, I'm not optimistic it could happen in a year. I think that's too ambitious. It's likely a 2 to 3 year.
In conjunction with the 25th anniversary, maybe?
There you go. I didn't know that. Right.
Yeah, I would
Defer that back to.
Yeah, we don't know, but I think it would be a shame if the National Center focus took away from the various issues that are addressed at the conference. So, yeah, I think we would go into it with that mindset.
Other questions or thoughts? Concerns? Ideas?
I do have to say, I do like the idea of coupling it with an existing event somewhere in the calendar, right? Because it gets harder and harder to excel these meetings.
No doubt.
So you have this focus.
Which
we've got jobs back on campus.
Which brings up a really good point, and I'll make it, then I'll transition to the other one, is that the National Center is not designed to compete with any other professional association for the services that it delivers. We were very clear about that. We're not going to compete with IACLEA conferences or NACUA conferences or ERMIA conferences or anywhere else that it could have a connection. We are designing everything the center does to supplement, augment, and help. So, this has already come up once. IACLEA is looking to do some work in campus mental health. We had a conversation with them already. They have an agenda they're moving forward on. And what we said to them was, how can the National Center, which doesn't even stood up yet, but how can the National Center support you in your work? We're not going to compete with you. We're not going to, if we can assign National Center staff as part of their job to do work for you in terms of research and so on and so forth, we'll do that if we can help fund it. But the idea is not to create another thing out there which is getting in the way in a calendar or taking away from something that any particular association does.
Yeah, for those of you who know us, we're collaborators. We like to collaborate. I can't wait to have a conversation with Kim about how we, try to figure out working together with the institute that you do every year, the Novak Institute on Hazing Prevention. There's a lot of initiatives out there that we want to collaborate on, and then make it available to the world through the portal.
What are some of your ideas about maybe with this slightly longer certification list? Things that you're thinking about.
So we were looking at threat assessment, clear, emergency management, Title IX. There was discussions around security audits, security assessments in some public safety organizations like management. Like now you're a supervisor in a public safety department university and you get a certificate from the National Center. That kind of stuff, and the list is long. Hazing, we have the discussion from the. Right. So we're working, and look, we can't do it all at once, but we can identify kind of what the list, and then begin to chunk them off. So by this time next year, maybe there are 2 or 3 up and running, and then by the year after, there are another 3 up and running, and we can kind of get it going that way.
Have you talked about different delivery systems for those certifications, so that they're not all get on a plane and come?
They'll be virtual as much as possible. The goal is to drive everything virtually where we can, so it's online learning. Again,
it may be blended.
Yeah, utilizing UVM's infrastructure, delivery infrastructure for distance learning and blended learning, to do it that way so that it's inexpensive for you not having to fly people around and all that kind of stuff. We're also
going to fly for them here in October, and then that will come.
All that's open, and we're trying to figure out if the topical areas don't drive some of how we deliver that information. We don't know. A lot of great questions, but we're figuring this out.
We're open to ideas for other, possible programs.
Are you guys exclusive in UVM? Like, are you willing to partner with other schools, maybe like UVM and another institution, partner together in a webinar?
Absolutely.
Yeah, UVM provides us. UVM gave us the technology not to have to outsource that to others.
So like we can like reuse their platforms there. But if your school, for example, had an area, a topical area that it was an expert in and could partner with the National Center, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
let's say
it should be that way.
unbelievable in bystander intervention. We, you know, the National Center would partner with you, with your organization to present a program.
UVM's
The difference is that it's through the National Center, it's free as opposed to alphabet super groups out there who are doing, you know, every other week how to do Title IX or how to do this and how to do that. And they're paying $2.95 for somebody you never heard of before in your life.
UVM provides the infrastructure support, but your institution or others may provide the subject matter expertise.
The other question is not directly related to the board, more so a best practice question directed at public safety professionals with years of experience. What has been, or have you had observance of campuses and how they communicate threat assessment policies like a shooter in place or active shooter or shelter in place? Like, how are those communicated to students, if at all? Have you noticed a specific trend in the way most schools do that, or is it just kind of every school does something a little bit different? Specifically on how those policies are communicated to student body.
Well, you know, interesting on that. Well, let me take the first shot. It's different where we go. I mean, if we step away from the National Center, now we step into our role in running Margolis Healy and working with schools all over North America, it's different. It's so different in places. It's one of the reasons why we built a mobile app to push that information out through, because there isn't consistency in how that's happening. And some schools do it really well, and other schools are still trying to figure it out, you know, and it comes down to resources and orientation and savviness with technology. And
so I would just give you two phrases that are commonly used in this area around emergency notification, right? Multi-layered and multimodal, right? Multi-layered basically means that you have several systems, several ways, several mechanisms to deliver messages, and then you're doing that through multiple modalities. So you have some type of emergency notification system, which is a typically you know, Blackboard Connect or one of those services. I should mention at least one or two.
Rave, Mirror 3.
Well, Mirror 3, so it doesn't sound
Everbridge.
like pushing,
Yeah, goes on and on.
Yeah, I'm not pushing Blackboard Connect. So multimodal. Ensuring that you are taking advantage of other platforms that you have. Still want to use your email, you still want to use desktop telephones, you still have those. You want to use notice boards, digital boards. I mean, there's so much technology you can push it through and make it pop up on everybody's computer if you're on the network. So there are a lot of ways to do that. And then the third thing I would say, so multimodal, multi-layered, and then template messages, having pre-canned messages that take the guesswork out as much as possible of delivering a message. So when something's happening, some critical incident is occurring, you know, in the fog of war, we don't think straight. So you want to have those template messages that someone can go in and modify it really quickly and push it out as fast as possible.
Well, I was going to talk about how things are communicated when the emergency is going on, more so orientation students come on campus. They get the code of conduct, they get the sexual assault.
Title IX information, all that, right.
But have you noticed some schools also disseminate those types of policies? Not necessarily I'm sending out there's something happening, here's an email, but we also have, you know, do they get those policies along with the other policies that we would consider standard?
Yeah, I would go back to what Gary said earlier. What we're seeing, what tends to be the trend is the mobile app, because, you know, if it's not mobile and you can't push it out to a smartphone, then students are probably not going to read it. That's one of the ways that I think a lot of folks are doing it now. And actually, in the interest of full disclosure, we make a mobile app that does that, so I just want to mention that, but that's one of the ways that I see folks doing it. Other questions about the National Center?
How long we go for, so I don't know. We've been here an hour, but I don't know what I'm going to say.
What time is this thing on?
It says 3:30.
Oh,
Next
okay.
one starts at 3:30.
Other?
Any thoughts? Jeff, if I could get you just to talk a little bit about the idea that we broached briefly around the standards thing and making sure that publications that are produced or that are documents that are published by the center don't kind of slowly kind of morph into standards.
Becoming standard here. I thought about this issue a lot in the context of threat assessment issues because, you know, with the exception of Virginia and Illinois, we don't typically think of there being stated standards of care for threat assessment and what you do. So in thinking about what college and university should be thoughtful of, I looked at the way that standards of care are developed in court in any number of different contexts. And one of those ways is for typical organizations like ANSI, American National Standards Institute, would bring a group of people together who would decide in these kind of meetings that Stephen was talking about, what are the things that we think are most important in this field? We're all experts doing our work. And they produce things like a risk management standard for higher education, which is a document that exists. In that, they cite to several threat assessment resources, like the Handbook for Campus Threat Assessment Teams. And that's co-authored by the folks that I did the DOJ grant, traveled around the country and did the threat assessment work with. So that citation and the fact that a panoply of groups analyzing Virginia Tech, them all saying, look, we should have threat assessment teams on campus. This is one of the elements. So you look at things like, what are national groups doing? What are national standards organizations, governmental affiliated or ad hoc, saying about what a best practice in the field is? What is custom in the field? What are institutions doing on a routine basis? Those things can all be admitted in court through what Peter Lake was talking about this morning, usually a high-paid expert who is willing to sit there and gather these resources and say, XYZ institution didn't follow the standard of care because the institution didn't do what was recommended in all these resources. So then you go back to the very good question that was asked, is this work going to be in the panoply of resources that are cited? I don't know yet. I can say you can have some comfort from the fact that the Violence Against Women Act, Campus Save Act, incorporations into college campuses, it says very explicitly with that and the Clery Act, not only does it not create a private cause of action, it can't be cited as a standard of care. It can't be put into evidence. How that works in practice, they're still going to try and slip it in. There's nothing saying that this kind of evidence, evidence about what the National Center says, can't be used in evidence. I think what it comes down to is there should be some assumption that if something coming out of something that sounds as august and is as august as this sounds mandatory, well, not mandatory, sounds like best practice that is widely adopted, you should view that as being influential to the standard of care from a legal perspective, but more importantly, from a practical perspective. If this august group of people have gotten together, pulled resources, pulled experts, and this is the result of, if you do this, your campus is going to be safer, then you ought to be doing it anyway, right? So don't worry so much about the legal piece, worry about, are we doing something that's consistent with this? If you're not doing something consistent with that because you've taken a good look at it and said, what we do on our campus works really well and it's more specific to our situation than what this is saying, I think you've also complied with the standard of care if you've given it a really good look.
And I think the key to one of the keys to what Jeff is saying is, you obviously have to acknowledge stuff that's out in the atmosphere, right? You have to acknowledge those things. But you also need, if you choose not to adopt one policy or one procedure over another, you need to be able, you ought to be doing that by design, not by default, right? I mean, we have this conversation with institutions all the time. Why do you use the campus public safety model that you use, right? Folks will say, because that's the way we've been doing it for the last 25 years. So we always encourage institutions to really think, why are we doing things the way we are? And so you should always be doing that, but you should be in light of everything that's out there. You know, what are the evolving standards in behavioral threat assessment? What are the evolving standards in investigating sexual and gender violence? What are the suicide prevention, hazing prevention, all those things that kind of make up the landscape of liability today? What are we doing?
If I channeled our BJA leadership next to me on this, I'm confident they would say to you that
the National Center is designed to be the national resource, not the national authority. It's not what it was designed to do.
To set you up and to decree what you need to do. It's a resource. It's a place where you go to get your questions answered, not where you go to be told what to do. It's a
Yeah.
very distinct difference in that, and I know that's what they would say, because it wasn't designed.
That's right, and so in Peter Lake's words, the center's more meant as a facilitator as opposed to a regulator.
Yeah, I think it's important to make that distinction because, and I think it's important for the center to be thoughtful of this as it creates, particularly anything that's narrative that's coming out of the center. That if you are collections of resources that have been handpicked because they're excellent, great. If it's narrative, and that might be viewed as stating a standard of care, just be very thoughtful of how it's phrased, and I have confidence that that will happen.
I think one of the challenges that some of us may face is that, you know, working out of our respective silos, you know, you sometimes have difficulty getting the attention of colleagues in another area to take something, shall we say, as seriously as you do. So, you know, if you're in, say, student affairs and you're trying to get the attention of your business affairs folks about something like a, you know, warning system, and they're saying, you know, we don't really need that. You know, to speak out of the other side of my mouth, and that's a totally fictitious example, it really is. Not telling you good examples. It can actually be helpful, conversely, to be able to point to something and say, you know what, this is a nationally recognized standard that could turn into a standard of care and institutional liability. So that's, you know, playing that card the other way is sometimes what at least I can find myself doing from time to time.
We'll stay here for a few minutes. I know there's another group coming in. And then we hope that as you think about more of what you've heard, you'll share with us your thoughts and ideas, maybe things that you see that we could do that we didn't think of, and there may be things that you want to get involved in. We'd love to have the involvement in the ideas. This is your center. Your tax dollars paid for it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.